Executive Talutus of the Khatin people. It has been 20 years now since my brother left on that ill-fated expedition. An expedition that the galactic community at large has condemned us for. An expedition of extermination. Year 23097 of the Imperial Khatin calendar. Human calendar, AD 2023. For the last 10 generations, our people have been studying a vastly technologically inferior race on a planet we have designated as POL3SH27, a death world whose gravitational force is nearly thrice that of the Khatin homeworld, and indeed amongst the highest of any recorded world capable of sustaining sentient life. This death world, located as the third planet from a highly radioactive sun and a system of 8 planets plus 5 dwarf planets, along the outer fringes, was known to its inhabitants by many names. Earth, Terra, home, this whole bunch of rock and space. Indeed, our scientists had laughed at how inefficient the whole system of these sentient people was, giving many names for a single item or entity. Some of their species even live whilst having entire sentences as names, whilst many only had one word for a name, like our people have. Even what they name their race isn't agreed upon amongst their people. Most call themselves human, but others call themselves Ningen, Menshin, people, Terran, and a host of other words that are nigh impossible to pronounce. The entirety of the dry land above the saline lakes and seas that cover most of the planet's surface, a valuable resource for sure, was separated into many different factions, nations they called them, each often fighting with the other over resources, not realizing the amount of resources that lay just a few miles under their feet. When we started observing this species, these humans, we did not feel it prudent to announce our discovery of this sentient species to the Galactic Senate, since these humans seemed to care more about killing each other in something they called the Second World War than respond to our hails. We knew they had some form of communication, since we witnessed it from high orbit. Orders from an old human, with what later was described as a silly little mustache, coming from deep inside the ground, were carried out on the other side of the continent within minutes. Was their method of communication so vastly inferior to ours that we simply could not communicate with them? After that, we simply gave up on trying to contact them. Over the years, we watched and learned that these humans had an alarming tendency to fight each other in bloody wars, and during each war, the ideology was different. Some fought for liberation against an oppressive regime. Others fought for possession of little clear minerals, composites of carbon atoms. Yet others fought for some black viscous material that was drilled out of the planet's crust. Scans indicate that this substance is some form of fossil fuel, and the people of the nation, known as the United States of America, would happily go to war over it, so they can run their highly inefficient trucks and loud motorcycles. But we feared them. We had seen how rapidly they progress, and their technology advances when they are under pressure or hostile threat. We feared what they would do once they broke free of their world's confines and spread out across the galaxy. So we assembled a small fleet, 1 medium capital ship, 2 light cruisers, 3 frigates, 3 troop carriers, 7 supply ships, and 8 recon craft. We didn't even bother to hide this from the Senate. We simply claimed that our probes had discovered a new space route to an unexplored system on our borders, and we wanted to be sure that what lay on the other side was not a threat. The Senate accepted this. We weren't the first to send a military fleet into unknown space before, and this fleet was by far not the largest. To keep up with the ruse, only volunteers were recruited into joining this expedition. Amongst them, my younger brother, who had a soul for adventure and discovery. The memories of seeing him dig around in the ground, hoping to find some forgotten ruins, still brings a smile to my face. 2 weeks later, we received a transmission that they had arrived in the system where POL3SH27 was located, and the mission was greenlit by our leaders. Not long after that, we heard no more. It has been 20 years now since that ill-fated expedition, an expedition that the galactic community at large would condemn us for later. An expedition of extermination. An expedition that the humans would later call kicking the Hornet's nest. Year 23,115 of the Khatin calendar. Human year, AD 2038. It has been 18 years since the flotilla disappeared to exterminate all sentient life on POL3SH27. And now we finally discovered what happened. Last week, an escape pod from the Honor of Khatin, the capital ship sent on that fateful expedition, appeared on our scanners. No life signs were detected on board. The onboard AI had broadcasting a distress signal once in range. Upon the opening of the pod, we discovered the decayed remains of 3 of our people, one still grasping a data chip in its bony grasp. their ID plates identifying them as crew members of the Honor of Khotun. Upon accessing the data chip, we learned what happened. As planned, the flotilla began their extermination, bombarding each and every city from orbit, killing many people. The Admiral, deciding that they had killed off most of the population of the planet, ordered for all troop ships, frigates, and supply ships, which also carried the entire regiments of our finest troops, to land on the planet and deploy all forces to complete the extermination, ignoring the scientists who warned him that the planet's gravity was too powerful for our thrusters, that once they landed, there was no way to leave. They couldn't contact us here in Khotun space, because by the time they passed the largest planet in the system, the radiation from the sun had damaged all long-range communication devices, despite the shields on their ships mitigating much of said radiation. Upon realizing this, it was decided to continue on instead, and do the repairs later after the mission was completed. All troops were ordered to equip their powered armor, but once they stepped foot on the planet's surface and the ship's countergravity drives no longer affected them, it became clear that this would take a while, as the servos and the armors had to run a near-combat output just to allow adequate movement across the uneven sandy desert we learned was known as the Sahara. This desolate place was so very different from the cool, humid forests we call home. The heat of this land was reportedly unbearable, and the troops were forced to return to their carriers after a short patrol, lest they succumb to dehydration or hypothermia. The Admiral, understanding the situation, decided to move the fleet to a different location, to the remains of a city known as Cairo. Thankfully, the landed ships had enough power to hover in the air a few dozen feet above the surface, but the ionic thrusters were of little use in the windswept desert, and the journey was slow. It took nearly 10 rotations of this planet for the ships to reach the river known by the humans as the Nile. The recordings that followed were confusing. At one moment, our troops were assaulted by humans wielding their primitive weapons that somehow managed to bypass our energy shields, cutting down scores of our troops while we were hard put to locate them. Our thermal sensors useless, since the sands surrounding them were at the same or similar temperature to that of the human scum's body temperature. Visual detection was also useless. Captured specimens revealed that these humans had dressed themselves up in clothes that matched the tone or color of the blasted desert the battle was taking place in. Some humans were still alive, and despite their heavily damaged state, they smiled, said, "Welcome to Earth," and revealed a small metallic object in their hand. Seconds later, there was an explosion, killing several of our troops and ending the pitiful lives of the humans as well. By the end of that first battle, over half of our troops alone were either killed or had succumbed to the heat and dryness. And that was when another recording appeared, as massive explosions rocked the 3 ships still in orbit above the planet, pushing them into the planet's gravity well and causing them to descend to the surface below. Almost immediately, the Admiral ordered that the life pods be manned, each holding a copy of everything that had transpired since they entered the system. Over 300 pods were launched. 18 years later, and only one returned intact. We grimaced, wondering what had happened. Included was a recording of the sensors in the immediate vicinity of the orbital fleet, showing multiple items tagged as human satellites orbiting the planet. We realized that some of these must have been some form of rudimentary space weapons in disguise. Soon, another fleet was assembled, this one much larger, and sent into the unknown system, once again disguising the true purpose of this fleet as simply discovering what happened to the fleet that disappeared 18 years ago. This fleet, too, was destroyed. It was destroyed in full view of Senate border monitoring vessels, doing their once-a-decade survey of every faction's borders. It was destroyed just after crossing our border into what we believed to have been wild, unclaimed space. It was destroyed when a fleet of warships of unknown affiliation appeared. No, not jumped in from hyperspace. They simply were there. The first thing they did was broadcast a message over every known channel in Senate space. We, the First Fleet of the Terran Interplanetary Union, demand the Khotun intrusions and attempts at our people's extermination cease immediately, else we will resort to martial actions. We knew it not at the time, but the humans, or Terrans as they would become known as in the galactic community, had in the span of less than 2 decades reverse-engineered our technology, improved upon it to the point where even their death world's high gravity was no longer an unsurpassable barrier, and their sun's radiation no longer caused any issues with any of the instruments, and had built a massive fleet. When our fleet ignored their warning and continued onwards, weapons emplacements appeared on the Terran warships, pointing warningly at our approaching ships. Another warning was issued. We say again, cease any and all aggression immediately. We prefer peace, but are ready for war. Still, our fleet had ignored their warning. Instead, our dreadnoughts had fired upon the Terran fleet, our weapons harmlessly bouncing off their shields. The sight left us stunned. Our shields work by stopping any energy-based attacks dead in their tracks, but theirs seemed to simply deflect the attacks from our dreadnoughts, like still water would reflect light coming in from an angle. "It is saddening to us, but you have chosen war," was broadcasted from the Terran fleet. Suddenly, dozens of Terran ships simply appeared on the flanks, and our fleet was decimated. The Terran weapons shooting projectiles that exploded mere moments upon impacting our hulls, bypassing our shields entirely. Through millennia, ever since the predecessors of the Galactic Senate first invented shielding technology, the use of armored hulls became obsolete as cheaper alternatives became widely available. By the time of the first attempted extermination of the Terran people, the hull of our dreadnoughts was just thick enough to survive the vacuum of space. The projectiles of even the Terran frigates tearing through that hull and shredding anything in its path. Afterwards, the Great Invasion began. Year 23,117 of the Khatin calendar. Human year, 2039. It has been 20 years since we first attempted to exterminate the Terrans on their homeworld. 2 since the start of the Terran invasion, and the invaders have nearly reached our homeworld of Khatin. Every fleet we built and sent at the invading forces was cut down as ruthlessly as that very first fleet we sent 2 years ago. Every world they attacked fell within weeks as our static defenses, our military bases, our forces, all were bombarded from orbit before their troops arrived, wielding new powered armor of their own, superior to ours, allowing them to wield massive weapons capable of destroying even the heaviest of our armored vehicles. Their fighters wielding weapons that destroyed our planetary air forces from beyond the horizon. Their armored vehicles shielded by the same type of shielding they deployed on their warships, rendering even our most powerful anti-armored batteries next to useless. We, the Khatin people, knew we would not be winning this war. We swallowed what little pride we had left and turned to the Galactic Senate for aid. Despite their numerous condemnations of our actions, they agreed to approach the Terran Interstellar Union. Almost immediately, the invasion ceased as the Terrans agreed to a ceasefire, whilst our diplomats negotiated with their leadership. They were surprisingly lenient in their demands, considering what we had done to them in the past, only demanding the resources required to rebuild their homeworld, Terra, and agreed to pull their forces away from our territory once the rebuilding of Terra was completed, as well as release any hostages back to our people. We were shocked that there was a small colony of our people still alive after all these years. My anger faded instantly once I saw my long-thought dead brother enter the family compound he had not stepped foot in 20 long years. Our beloved mother collapsing in tears and joy at seeing him, alive and healthy, smiling as though he had just returned from the adventure of a lifetime. Turns out, while the Terrans can hold a grudge, they have strict rules of war, called the Geneva Convention, forbidding the inhuman treatment of anyone who has surrendered, amongst other things. When the Terrans pulled out from the last of our colonized planets, I traveled there and conversed with one of the admirals in charge, asking them why they were so different. "You kicked the Hornets' nest when you invaded our home and slaughtered our people," he said. "But as we said just under 2 years ago, we prefer peace, but are ready for war." Afterwards, they returned to their own territory. In the coming years, they would thrive and expand their own territory into wild and uncharted space. But true to their word, they always preferred peace, but were ready for war. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story, and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.